A dull thud in the distance roused Private Crowe into a foggy consciousness. He could hear muffled voices echoing, intermingled with the reverberating gunfire. His head swam as he blinked his eyes and sat up. He was blind in one eye, but couldn't for the life of him remember why at this point. The nearby wall was on fire. He struggled to focus on what had happened. He was interrupted by more gunfire, shouts, and inhuman screeches. They seemed to be getting further away, echoing. Then he heard the familiar and blessed sound of an APC shifting into gear and revving up. He sprang to his feet and promptly blacked out. A sickening, slithering sound nearby roused Private Wierzbowski into a foggy consciousness. The first thing he noticed was his helmet in the resin-encrusted floor of the hive, the camera smashed to pieces. He looked toward the sound. One of the, what had the report said? Eggs? Was opening, and something was making its way out. He struggled inside his tomb. The resin moved a little, but ultimately held. The creature emerging from the pod angled itself towards him, and seemed to be coiling its tail, preparing to leap. Wierzbowski struggled harder, wanting to look away and failing. The cocoon wouldn't budge. With the sound of a cracking whip, the spidery creature was engulfed in flame. Wierzbowski looked around in confusion for the source. Out of the smoke strode the familiar figure of Crowe, hefting a familiar-looking incinerator. "You dropped something?" he grinned. Wierzbowski heaved a sigh of relief. Crowe had blood on one side of his face, but seemed otherwise unharmed. "My ECG's all smashed up, so I guess they think we're dead," Crowe explained as he broke Wierzbowski out of the resin-caked wall. He indicated some wires dangling down one side of his armour that ended in what used to be a small plastic box of his vitals transponder. Wierzbowski still had some pieces of hardened slime stuck to him, but was now free. They both turned suddenly and caught silhouettes, big black ones, through the smoke, moving down the corridor that led back to the stairwell and salvation. "No way out that way," Crowe stated, making to move in the opposite direction. More big black silhouettes were visible in that direction too, and they were coming closer. Displaying the quick thinking that had gotten them out of worse situations than this, Wierzbowski shoved Crowe into an alcove at the foot of his former prison. He then positioned himself in front of his comrade and took up a stance, gripping the nearby hive, letting his head fall forward as if unconscious. "Dude, what are you—" A swift kick silenced Crowe as the soft sound of claw on metal approached. He quickly shut off the flamethrower. Between the resin and Wierzbowski's legs, he saw the black things stop in front of them. He couldn't tell how many there were, but they didn't seem overly concerned about their guests. They were more interested in the charred egg that was still smouldering. Not a sound passed between the creatures as Crowe held his breath and his bladder. After an eternity, Crowe felt his friend relax, but only so far. "Dude, let's go," Crowe hissed. Wierzbowski started to struggle, and Crowe realised the aliens had re-glued him to the wall. "Hold on." Bracing himself against the wall, Crowe gave an almighty shove, and once more they were free. They quickly picked themselves up and hurried toward the stairwell. Almost out of breath, they finally reached ground level. "I really got to cut down," Crowe said in between dry heaves. Not 100 metres distant was the exit, though curiously looking a lot more worse for wear than when they entered. Wierzbowski started to jog towards it. "Dude, wait up!" Wierzbowski stopped and turned, then slowly turned back towards the whining sound coming from outside. It was increasing in pitch. "What is that?" Crowe was cut off by a crash, followed by a series of bigger crashes, increasing in crescendo until a fireball appeared at the exit, which suddenly stopped being an exit as a massive blackened shape with a strangely familiar profile split it wide open. Wierzbowski bolted past Crowe in the other direction. Crowe, his burning lungs losing out against the burning rest of him, was right behind him. With the fireball licking at the heels of their boots, Wierzbowski suddenly stopped and, grabbing Crowe, threw both of them down a stairwell. They hit the landing as flame roared over and past the Marines. Crowe sat up, then fell right down again as a piece of debris bouncing along in the explosion's wake hit him squarely in the face. As Crowe moaned over his bloody nose, Wierzbowski crawled over to the thing that had hit him. It was a helmet. It was a helmet that had a hole punched right in the front, right where it used to say, "Fly the friendly skies." "Trust me, dude, I was helping Hudson with the schematics. There's an access tunnel that goes straight from here right into the sub-basement of the colony. From there we can get to the uplink tower and get the smart-ass down from the Sulaco. Walk in the park." Wierzbowski threw him a dubious look. "Trust me," Crowe assured him cheerily. They'd managed to make it back down to the sub-level without incident, but it had taken some time, evading the aliens on several occasions. They'd found Drake's smart gun empty. They'd also found Drake in much the same condition. Now they were confronted by a pipe. A dark pipe. A kilometre long. They briefly heard gunfire and screeches echoing from the tunnel a little while earlier while trying to summon the courage to enter. If the things are getting shot over at the colony, Crowe reasoned, someone must have survived the crash. They reluctantly entered. What greeted them at the other end had almost made them wish they'd stayed in the atmosphere processor. Almost. It was hard to tell how many of the aliens had been carved up by the now defunct sentry guns. There were pieces of them all over the place, and acid scoring marring the walls, to the point that part of the ceiling had collapsed, bringing down half a ton of dirt and rock with it. They picked their way through the mess and made towards the door, which now wore a huge hole. The creatures had somehow smashed through it, rather than try to wrench it open. Wierzbowski stared incredulously. It had to be nearly 10 inches thick, and the edges were peeled away like tinfoil. He almost jumped out of his skin at the roar of automatic gunfire that interrupted his musings. He looked at Crowe, who was looking up at the ceiling. They sought out the nearest stairwell. The gunfire stuttered on for what seemed like an eternity, as did the inhuman screeches as Wierzbowski and Crowe crept along. The barricade in the stairwell had been repaired recently, and the aliens hadn't tried to get in that way again. This left them hiking all the way to the north end of the complex and back again, trying to find a way up to operations. They were getting close now. Over the din of the sentry guns one level up, a high-pitched hissing caused both of them to hit opposite sides of the corridor as the ceiling above them dissolved. Crowe held his nose as a huge black mass sloughed through the resulting hole and hit the floor with a thud. Something else big and black and nasty stuck its teeth-filled face through the hole and regarded the Marines. Crowe gave it a blast with the flamethrower, then he and Wierzbowski ran the other way as fast as they could. "Trust me, dude," Crowe shouted over the screaming wind. "Remember I said I was helping Hudson look at the schematics? There's maintenance hatches in the roof. We can get in that way." After they'd finished running, they'd eventually found a ladder that got them up onto the roof, and were now clambering their way amongst cables, conduits and antenna. Towards the south end of the complex, they found what they wanted. Wierzbowski tried to open it. After a few seconds, Crowe cursed under his breath. "Forget it, dude. It's welded shut." Wierzbowski squinted as he scanned the rooftop, trying to shield his eyes from the incessant dust. He spied a way in and pointed it out. A skylight not far from the main corridor to Ops and Medical. They ran to it and looked down. They could only see into the crawl space below, not the corridor. "Guess they must have sealed it," Crowe said. The two scanned the immediate vicinity for another way in, and saw them. The aliens. A horde. Climbing slowly over the edge of the roof with a singular purpose. Silently, straight towards them. An un-alien movement caught Crowe's attention out of the corner of his eye. The uplink tower slowly pivoting. He squinted into the gale. "Hey, is that Bish?" He was cut off, and Wierzbowski jumped onto the skylight and grabbed his armour, dragging both of them down. They hit the hatch together, and it gave way underneath them, sending them a further 2.5 metres to the corridor floor. Trying to catch his breath, Crowe turned to the sound of something mechanical as it swiveled towards him. Sentry guns. 2 of them, not 6 inches from his head. He squeezed his eyes shut at the oblivion to come, and was roughly jerked to his feet as Wierzbowski grabbed him by the collar and dragged them into a storage cupboard before the sentries could fire. Neither saw the alien on the roof, looking into the smashed skylight and crawl space that it led to. The Marines paused to consider their situation. "Anything broken?" Crowe inquired. Wierzbowski shook his head, still winded. "How the hell did we get past the sentries?" Crowe wondered. His friend scanned the shelves of the room looking for a tool, a weapon, or at least a clue. Then the lights went out. Bathed in red emergency lighting, Crowe sunk to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He could hear the wind whistling past the hole in the roof. He could also hear a familiar pinging noise. He looked up to see Wierzbowski looking down at him. The same realisation in his eyes. The guns didn't fire because of our friend or foe PDTs. Wierzbowski ran out of the room. Crowe followed. Wierzbowski walked up to the gun, flipped the release catches on the tripod, hefted it and switched it over to manual. A grin crept across Crowe's face. Righteous. The pinging that was coming from beyond the makeshift barricade rose to a higher pitch before almost silencing altogether. Crowe puzzled for a moment. They must have sealed themselves in. We can't help them, but listen, I'm sure I saw Bishop at the landing field. He must be calling out the dropship. Come on, they'll be so surprised to see us. They rushed through the labyrinth back again towards the north end of the complex, the landing field, and safety. A couple of times they needed to double back from dead ends or otherwise impassable corridors. Standing at the lip of an acid hole that spanned a whole corridor, still slick with rainwater from a hole in the roof, Crowe reconsidered. I don't know, dude. Maybe we should just climb down here. Unfortunately, down here led all the way to the reservoir under the sub-basement, and handholds were in short supply. As it happened, their decision was made for them when a muffled whump shook the entire corridor, sending Crowe headfirst down the hole with a yell. Wierzbowski recognised the sound of a grenade explosion, but couldn't pinpoint its location. Not that it mattered much. He'd also heard Crowe's yell end in a splash, meaning there was a good chance he was alive, and therefore not to be left behind. Crowe came up for air with a spluttering gasp. He blinked a few times, trying to get his bearings. He looked up through the holes he'd fallen down. He thought he could hear voices nearby, but rationalised it was probably concussion and started to climb out of the water. Something heavy landed in front of him that almost caused him to fall back in. That something offered him a hand and pulled him up out of the hole. Geez, dude, give a man a heart attack. Wierzbowski thumbed over his shoulder in the direction of the voices and the oddly comforting sound of a motion tracker. The man lugging the sentry gun trotted towards the noise, leaving Crowe to impotently empty the water out of his incinerator, hoping it would relight. They rounded a corridor just in time to see a figure, or was it two figures, disappear down a side corridor. They sprinted to the side corridor and caught a glimpse of Hicks and that civvy woman in the lift. A black shape lunged out of a hole in the wall for the closing door. "Hicks!" Crowe shouted, only to be drowned out by a volley of pulse rifle fire. The alien fell to the ground, a spitting, writhing mess of rage. Neither much fancy going that way. Wierzbowski gripped Crowe's shoulder, and the latter turned to look down the way they'd came. It looked just like the alien hive. Biomechanical growths clung to the walls. These biomechanical growths moved, though, quickly. It seemed like dozens, hundreds of the things, scuttling over every surface, a sickly, shiny black shockwave. They ran. Right into the alien that Hicks had shot, trying to get to its feet. They thought about jumping over it, but its tail was still whipping around, deadly even though mortally wounded. Wierzbowski turned to face their oncoming foe. At his back, Crowe managed to get his flamethrower started. Only enough fuel for one more blast. They had each other's back, as it had ever been, even to the end. Crowe whispered, "Are you mean?" Wierzbowski had only one response. "Yeah." A number of things happened at once. Just as Crowe went to activate the incinerator, a chime sounded. The acid-scarred floor gave way underneath the alien, and Wierzbowski fired. The reason UA-571C remote sentry units are mounted on tripods is the simple fact that a man, any man, can't fire one standing up, or lying down. Especially not lying down. Take your arm off at the shoulder, if you're lucky. Wierzbowski found this out the hard way. The gun threw him back, which threw Crowe forward. They sailed over the recently made hole, an alien that it had unceremoniously swallowed, and flew straight into the elevator. The fact that the sentry only had a handful of rounds saved the Marines from worse wounds than the few broken ribs that they had now. Those rounds had sliced through the lead alien and driven the others back for a moment, clearly not expecting such an attack. Wierzbowski lunged at the controls, and the doors slowly closed as the aliens resumed their advance. Crowe studied the armour on the floor of the elevator as they ascended. The ragged holes on it didn't bode well for Hicks. But then, Hicks was no longer in the elevator, so that counted for something. He didn't hear the ominous creaking over the ringing in his ears as he and the elevator rose. The chime to indicate that they'd reached ground level sounded almost ironically. Wierzbowski, weaponless, pinned himself against the lift controls as the door opened. Crowe stood at the back of the elevator, flamethrower at the ready. There was nothing but corridor, north lock, and howling wind beyond. And something else, a whining, too regular to be part of the constant storms that lash this godforsaken rock. A whining every Marine knows and loves. A whining of an idling UD-4L dropship. They smiled at each other. Wierzbowski ducked out of the elevator and Crowe started to follow, only to have his first step go through the acid-weakened floor. The rest of the floor began to follow suit. Crowe scrambled for a handhold in the gap between elevator and corridor, which started to disappear as the lift door closed, which started to disappear as the automatic door closed. Wierzbowski leapt back in front of the door and grabbed Crowe's arms, slowly lifting him out of the hole. Alarms to clear the closing door sounded insistently, but Wierzbowski ignored them. They'd gotten this far. They were so close to getting out of this mess. A pissy elevator door wasn't going to stop him, though the alien that suddenly took hold of Crowe's ankle might. "Dude, get it off me!" he hollered. Wierzbowski managed to get Crowe clear of the hole, but the alien hauled its bulk out and followed them. Crowe kicked at it with his free foot, but he might as well have been kicking against a steel wall. The alien's hand was like a vice. The door kept bumping against his leg, oblivious to the struggle. Crowe heard the dropshift's lifter quads kick into life. It was leaving. Not yet. Not like this. The alien grinned behind translucent lips, teeth parting, inner jaw preparing to strike. No longer caring about the consequences, Crowe untangled himself from the flamethrower strap and jammed the business end into that gaping maw. "Wierzbowski, get down!" he screamed. Half the barrel disappeared before Crowe pulled the trigger. He was surprised. He expected most of the fire to backwash straight into him. A little did, but nothing else happened for the 3 seconds it took to empty the weapon. The alien was oddly still. Then it happened. He could only see the alien from the chest up, but in between those chitinous exposed ribs, the flesh started to glow orange, then red. Similarly, every obscene nook and cranny on its ridged head glowed the same colour red. Crowe winced at what was to come. And it did. Flame erupted from every vent in the alien's body, most of the acid being vaporised in the heat. Most, but not all. The door took a large amount, but not all. It started to eat into Crowe's boot and quickly after, his foot, as the alien's head exploded and Wierzbowski finally dragged him clear of the elevator. They could still hear the dropship revving, but it wouldn't be there for long. The alien's hand, still attached to the arm, which was still attached to the alien's body, clung to Crowe's ankle. He tried to prise it off, gritting his teeth through the pain of the acid eating through the bone of his foot. It proved futile. Wierzbowski disappeared briefly during Crowe's struggles and returned with a fire axe. He swung it high and brought it down on the alien's wrist. It sent a jolt up his arm as it bounced off, leaving barely a nick. Both of the men's eyes widened in shock. "Again! Quick!" Crowe shouted. Wierzbowski complied with much the same result. Crowe suddenly slid back towards the lift with a yelp. Something, presumably more aliens, had hold of the lead alien's body and were dragging it and Crowe back into the elevator shaft. He braced his good leg against the door and looked his brother-in-arms in the eye and raised the handle of the flamethrower to his mouth. "Do it," he resolved quietly. Wierzbowski took a deep breath, then swung the axe down with all his might. It was a clean cut, taking Crowe's foot off just above the ankle. He roared as he bit into the incinerator handle, so hard he broke 2 teeth. The dreadful cold spreading up his leg meant the pain in his mouth didn't even register. Wierzbowski picked up his friend, put him over his shoulder, and carried him out of there. Hope failed. They reached the landing field just in time to see the dropship take off. Wierzbowski's frantic wavings achieved no result, nor did his lighting of marking flares. The ship was out of range. He put Crowe down as gently as he could on the landing grid, then sunk to his knees, nearing exhaustion. "Dude," Crowe croaked. "Look, they're going to the atmosphere processor." Wierzbowski followed his gaze and saw indeed that the ship wasn't making a break for orbit, but was flying into the atmosphere processor's superstructure. "Go, you can make it." Crowe was deathly pale, and there was a lot of blood coming from his leg. The other tore a sleeve off his fatigues and started to wrap it around the amputated stump as tight as he could. "No," Crowe whispered hoarsely. "There's no time." Wierzbowski finished his work quickly. Crowe protested as he was hefted over a shoulder again. "Leave me." There was no way that was going to happen. They couldn't hear the aliens behind them over the wind, nor could they hear the announcements from the atmosphere station in front of them. The explosions ripping through it, however, told them all was not well. Wierzbowski had run as fast as he could and almost collapsed on the entrance ramp. The wreckage of the bug stomper and APC had long burnt out. He sank to one knee. Crowe shifted his weight off Wierzbowski's shoulder and slumped onto the ramp. "Go!" Crowe was fading in and out of consciousness. Wierzbowski shook his head. "Leave me here. Go get the ship. You can come back here. Pick me up." His comrade looked back the way they'd came. Dark shapes could be seen scrambling over the twisted rock formations. They'd be here in less than a minute. An explosion ripped out overhead. They both looked up to see the dropship fly out and away. They watched it disappear into the clouds. The aliens were at the base of the ramp. Crowe rasped, "Hope someone calls my folks." Wierzbowski sniggered, then laughed. He laughed and found that he couldn't stop.